The crowd went completely silent, cameras froze, and fans at home all asked one question: who is she? No hype, no build-up, just pure shock. Thekla's debut didn't just surprise WWE fans, it left them speechless. And what happened next? Nobody saw this coming. Let's go back to that moment. Not the wrestling moves, not the pyrotechnics, but the atmosphere. Imagine the arena. It's a typical Friday night. The air is thick with the smell of popcorn and anticipation. The noise is a constant, dull roar, a mixture of cheering, shouting, and the thumping bass of entrance music we have heard 1,000 times before. The audience is comfortable. They think they know the script. They think they know exactly who is walking through that curtain next. And then, the music cuts. Usually, when the music stops, there is a technical error. People look around. They check their phones. There is an awkward murmur. But this time, the lights didn't just dim. They vanished. The arena was plunged into a darkness so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on 20,000 people. For 10 seconds, there was nothing. No sound, no light, just the breathing of the person next to you. Then, a single spotlight hit the top of the stage. It wasn't flashy. It didn't strobe or flicker. It was a cold, white beam. And standing there, motionless, was Thekla. She didn't pose. She didn't scream at the crowd to wake them up. She didn't run down the ramp high-fiving the front row. She simply stood there. Her posture was terrifyingly calm. In a world built on chaos, noise, and desperate pleas for attention, her stillness was the loudest thing in the building. The stickman animation here would just be a single, static line amidst a sea of chaotic squiggles. That contrast is what caught everyone off guard. You could feel the confusion rippling through the stands. You could see people leaning forward, squinting. The commentary team, usually quick with a biography or a stat sheet, said absolutely nothing. Why? Because they weren't acting. They were genuinely stumped. The script they were handed earlier that day didn't have a name listed for this segment. This is the psychological power of the unknown. When we see something we cannot categorize, our brains freeze. We stop processing the show and start processing the threat. Is this real? Is this part of the show? Who allowed this person out here? Thekla began to walk. It was a slow, deliberate march. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked straight ahead, focusing on the ring as if it were the only thing in the universe that mattered. The silence stretched on. It wasn't the silence of boredom, it was the silence of a held breath. It was the kind of tension you feel before a storm breaks. Fans usually boo strangers. They jeer at people they don't know. But they didn't boo Thekla. They were too busy trying to understand the aura she was projecting. It was an aura of absolute, undeniable danger. As she slid under the bottom rope and stood in the center of the ring, the camera zoomed in on her face. There was no smile, no nervousness, just a cold, predatory focus. And in that moment, before a single bell rang or a single move was executed, the entire landscape of the division shifted. The fans weren't asking, will she win? They were asking, what is she capable of? The silence finally broke, not with a cheer, but with a collective gasp. The story had begun, and nobody had the first clue how it would end. While the arena was locked in a trance, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that moves at the speed of light. The internet. In the modern era, nothing happens in a vacuum. A debut in the ring is immediately dissected by millions of thumbs scrolling on glass screens across the globe. But Thekla's entrance caused something rare in the digital age, a glitch in the conversation. Usually, when a new wrestler debuts, social media lights up with facts. Oh, that's name from the indies. Or I saw her in Japan last year. Or here are her stats. It's a race to see who can be the smartest fan in the room. But when Thekla appeared, the timeline froze. People were typing, but they weren't posting facts. They were posting questions. Who is that? Trended worldwide in under 3 minutes. Not her name, just the question. There is a unique vulnerability in not knowing. For wrestling fans, who pride themselves on knowing every rumor and every contract signing, being completely blindsided is uncomfortable. It feels like losing control. The broadcast team played into this beautifully, whether by design or genuine shock. The cameras cut to fans in the front row, grown men with their mouths open, teenagers holding their phones up but forgetting to hit record. The lens captured the raw, unfiltered confusion of the human face. And then came the aesthetic. Thekla's look was distinct. It wasn't the polished rhinestone-covered gear of the typical superstar. It was rugged. It looked lived in. It told a story of battles fought in places the cameras didn't go. Online, the detectives started working. Screenshots were analyzed. Her tattoos, her boots, the way she taped her wrists, everything was scrutinized. This is where the emotional hook sank deep. Fans weren't just watching a show anymore. They were solving a mystery. They became active participants in her story. The chatter shifted from confusion to intrigue. She moves like a predator. One comment read, "I've never seen eyes that cold," said another. In the animation of this story, imagine thousands of little text bubbles popping up, overlapping, creating a chaotic cloud of noise. While the figure of Thekla remains perfectly still, in the center, untouched by the speculation. This reaction highlights a deep psychological truth. We are attracted to what we cannot possess. By not giving the audience her name, her history, or her voice immediately, the show made her the most valuable asset in the company. She was a puzzle. The comparisons started to happen. People began comparing her to legends of the past, figures who spoke softly but carried a heavy stick. But even those comparisons felt hollow. She didn't feel like a copy of someone else. She felt like a glitch, like someone had hacked the broadcast feed and inserted a character from a completely different genre of violence. The emotional weight here is the disruption of the status quo. We are creatures of habit. We like our heroes to be heroic and our villains to be cowardly. We like to know who to cheer for. Thekla denied us that comfort. She was neither good nor bad. She was simply inevitable. As the commercial break hit, the engagement numbers were skyrocketing. The segment wasn't even a match, it was just a walk to the ring, yet it had more emotional resonance than the main event. The world had stopped spinning for 5 minutes, all because a woman walked into a room and refused to explain herself. The digital world was begging for answers, but Thekla was only interested in asking questions with her fists. If the reaction in the arena was shocked, and the reaction online was chaos, the reaction backstage was something far more dangerous: fear. Imagine the gorilla position, the area just behind the curtain where the producers, the boss, and the other wrestlers watch the show on monitors. Usually, this place is a hub of noise. People are shouting cues, timing segments, and joking around. But when Thekla walked out, the gorilla position went quiet. The established stars, the champions holding the gold belts, the veterans who had seen everything, they all stopped. They watched the monitor with a mix of curiosity and dread. Why? Because they know the business. They know that spots are limited. There is only so much TV time. There is only so much money to go around. When someone walks in with that level of natural magnetism, it means someone else is losing their spot. The stickman visual here is powerful. A group of star stick figures with crowns and belts, watching a lone, unadorned figure on a screen, and slowly realizing their crowns are not as secure as they thought. There is a visceral, human jealousy that bubbles up in these moments. It's not petty, it's survival. A wrestler's career is fragile. One injury, one bad storyline, or one new debut can end a run at the top. Thekla represented the new. She was the shiny object that the fans were suddenly obsessed with. You could feel the shift in the air backstage. The whispers started. Did you know she was coming? Who cleared this? Why does she get that kind of entrance? The insecurity of the roster tells you more about Thekla's impact than the fan reaction does. Fans react to entertainment. Peers react to talent. And they saw something in her movement to fluidity, a legitimacy that threatened to expose anyone who was just playing wrestler. The emotional conflict here is deep. Imagine being a champion who has worked 300 days a year, done all the media appearances, smiled for every photo, and followed every rule. Then, a stranger walks in, says nothing, does nothing, and steals the entire world's attention. It feels unfair. It feels like a betrayal. But it also breeds competition. As Thekla walked back through the curtain after her segment, the hallway cleared. Nobody stepped up to shake her hand immediately. It wasn't out of disrespect, it was out of caution. It was the way animals in the wild watch a new apex predator enter the territory. You don't approach until you know if it bites. She walked past the champions, past the legends, and didn't look down or up. She looked through them. This backstage tension set the stage for everything that would follow. The locker room wasn't just confused. They were on notice. The standard for intensity had just been raised. Thekla didn't just debut a character. She challenged the ecosystem. The emotional aftermath of this section is isolation. Thekla, despite the roar of the crowd, was now the loneliest person in the building. She had millions of eyes on her, but not a single friend in that hallway. That is the price of immediate greatness. You separate yourself from the pack, but in doing so, you become the target of the pack. The silence backstage was heavier than the silence in the arena, because backstage, the silence was personal. Who is she? The question hung over the arena even after the show ended. The lights went down, the cleanup crew began sweeping up the popcorn, but the feeling remained. Let's dive into the internal world of Thekla for a moment. We often focus on the reaction of the crowd, but what about the person in the center of the storm? To maintain that level of stoicism, that mask of absolute indifference, requires an immense amount of emotional control. Inside, the heart must be hammering against the ribs. The adrenaline must be spiking, but the face remains stone. The mystery of Thekla wasn't a marketing gimmick, it was a burden. When you debut with that much silence and that much gravity, you create a promise. You promise the audience that you are worth the mystery. You promise that when you finally do fight, or speak, it will be legendary. That is a crushing amount of pressure. Most wrestlers get to debut as underdogs. They lose a few matches, they build sympathy, they grow slowly. They are allowed to make mistakes. Thekla was denied that luxury. By debuting as an enigma, she had to be perfect from second one. The narrative here shifts to the concept of projection. The fans didn't know her, so they projected their own desires onto her. Some saw a savior who would fix the division. Some saw a villain who would destroy their favorites. Some saw a rebellious anti-hero. She became a vessel for the audience's imagination. In our minimalist animation, imagine Thekla walking, carrying a giant, invisible box. The box is labeled expectations. It gets heavier with every step, every tweet, every shocked reaction. Back at the hotel that night, away from the lights, the reality sets in. The phone is blowing up. Friends, family, old training partners, everyone wants a piece of the moment. I saw you. You're trending. But the isolation deepens. To keep the mystique, she can't engage. She can't go on Twitter and say, "Wow, thanks guys, that was crazy." She has to stay in the shadows. She has to live the gimmick. The line between the person and the persona begins to blur. This is the tragic beauty of the monster debut. To be the monster, you have to kill the human parts of yourself that want connection and validation. You have to accept that for a while, people won't understand you. The media chaos the next morning was unprecedented. Wrestling journalists were scrambling, calling sources in Japan, in Europe, trying to find footage of her past. They found fragments. Grainy videos of her fighting in small dojos, clips of her training in brutal conditions. These fragments only added to the legend. They painted a picture of someone who didn't care about fame, only about combat. The emotional weight for the fan is the feeling of discovery. It's like finding a rare band before they get famous. But for Thekla, the weight was the knowledge that the easy part, the walking out, was over. Now, she had to deliver on the silence. She had to prove that the shock wasn't a fluke. The mystery was her shield, but it was also a wall. It kept the critics out, but it kept the support out too. She was standing on the summit of a mountain she had just climbed in 10 seconds. Looking down, realizing that the fall from this height would be fatal. Days turned into weeks. The shock of the debut settled into a simmering respect. But as time went on, the true meaning of that night began to reveal itself. It wasn't about a new wrestler joining a roster. It was about a return to feeling. In an era of manufactured entertainment, where every promo is scripted and every match is rehearsed to perfection, Thekla's debut was a reminder of the power of raw presence. The twist in our story isn't a plot point, it's a realization. We thought we were speechless because we were confused, but looking back, we were speechless because we were relieved. We were relieved to see something that felt real. Eventually, Thekla spoke. Eventually, she wrestled. The bell rang, and she was every bit as dangerous as she looked. But the magic of that first night, that initial walk, stands alone as a piece of art. The aftermath affected everyone differently. For the fans, it reignited their love for the surprise. It taught them to stop reading spoilers and just watch the show, hoping for that feeling again. For the locker room, it raised the bar. The lazy wrestlers got cut. The hard workers stepped up. Thekla's presence forced everyone to be better, sharper, more intense. She didn't just take a spot. She expanded the entire landscape. For Thekla herself, the mask eventually softened, just a fraction. We started to see the human being, the dedication, the sacrifice, the years of travel that led to that one spotlight. The story ends with a reflection on silence. We live in a noisy world. We scream to be heard. But Thekla taught us that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Power isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the one everyone watches when you stop moving. In the final scene of our animation, we see the stick figure of Thekla, no longer surrounded by question marks, but surrounded by a glowing aura of respect. She unlaces her boots, sits on a bench in the locker room, and finally, for the first time, exhales. The screen fades to black with a simple thought. She didn't just arrive. She reminded us why we watch. That is the legacy of the debut. It wasn't a viral moment. It was a heartbeat. A reminder that in the middle of the spectacle, the human element, the aura, the spirit, the soul is still the only thing that truly matters. Everyone asked, where did she come from? The answer was never a place on a map. She came from the part of us that still believes in monsters, in heroes, and in the shock of the new. She came from the silence. And now, the world was finally listening.